I'm Mark Robertson and welcome to VI Sports. Another year has gone by and it is time for our Sports Hall of Fame special. Joining me is Lois Smith. She is the chair and director of the Inductions Committee. And Lois, you've got some very special people being inducted this time around.
We do, Mark, and thank you for having me back to tell you about them. We have some amazing people this year. The list of accomplishments would just blow your mind.
Now tell me a little bit about on the athletic side, because there's a whole variety of people that are being inducted. We'll start with the athletes.
I would like to start by telling you about Karen March. An car accident, put her in a wheelchair at a very young age. She did take up wheelchair racing, and she went right to the top in wheelchair racing, went to World Championships, Paralympian athlete in Athens, and then she decided to retire, and she took up cycling for recreation. And then she got into competitive paracycling, and lo and behold, all the way to the top in paracycling and winner of the overall World Cup in 2011.
Wow.
And you know, you can build your physical strength whether you're in a wheelchair or not, but imagine the mental strength that Karen has that can take her to the very top in two completely different sports.
Amazing. You also have a gentleman, we can call him a senior. I believe you said he's 87 years old with an incredible background, still competing.
Yes, Maurice Tarrant. He's a running legend. He began running as a young man in England, immigrated to Canada, did some more running down east, but you know, family and work and life gets in the way. He came to Victoria in his mid-50s and rediscovered running. And since then, now I had to write this down to make sure I got it right. He has set 65 Canadian and 10 world records.
Wow.
He has competed and won over 200 races in the Island Race Series and completed 8 marathons. And as you say, Maurice is 87 years old and he is still running. And frankly, I wouldn't want to have to race against him.
Now, how tough was it to pick the nominees, and what is the whole process of doing that?
Oh, it's always tough. We have so many good nominations. We have over 100 active files, and we receive more nominations every year. We try for some diversity in the sports. We try for some diversity in the ages. But first and foremost, we look for the achievements.
I know they don't necessarily get, you can be nominated one year, that doesn't necessarily mean you get in that year, so it is kind of an ongoing process, isn't it?
It is an ongoing process. It can be quite a long wait list. It is very rare, as you say, for somebody to be inducted in the year they're nominated. We do, this year, have one inductee whose resume was so compelling, it was completely a no-brainer, and we'll be getting to him.
All right, we're going to have a look at our first 2 athletic inductees.
My transition to this level of sport was a little different. And just growing up, it was normal sport. It was high school sport, just being outdoors, but nothing overly competitive. And it was after the injury that that all kind of came into play. Well, it was a challenging time for sure. I think after the injury and you know, dealing with loss of function, physical function, what I found very early on was that all I wanted to do was move and was be active. That you know, seemed to give you purpose, and you know, when you're trying to figure all that out again, the ability to move was quite important. Actually, after injury, it took a few years. I didn't even know about parasport, to be honest. And it was after I moved to BC and was looking for something more than I was finding myself. But I was hooked up through BC Wheelchair Sports and popped in a chair and knew it was something I wanted to try right away.
I almost can't even comment on her best qualities because she's such a modest athlete. She was just, the biggest thing that I always noticed about her was that consistency. She was always consistent. Her training was consistent, her attitude was consistent, she was always positive. She was just an excellent person to be around and just inspiring to in her own right.
For me, I think it was certainly a journey. There wasn't one time where I said, even when I started competing locally or provincially, that I thought, you know, had my eye on the Paralympics. It kind of happened organically. I guess as far as a legacy is that throughout, no matter what disability, that you can do it. That, you know, like everyone says, you put your mind to it and there's something you want to do, you surround yourself with the best people, you commit, and you do it.
When I joined the RAF, conscripted, I found I could run. And a lot of that, I think, was from childhood, because in those days, no vehicles, walked everywhere, ran everywhere, anything like that. So I had a good base for running, and then I found in the RAF I could run. Got out of the RAF, 53, and so then I got into sort of serious running in my 20s.
Dad's a very humble man. He's certainly humble with his talents and his running, and he doesn't like to talk about himself. He's quite modest.
This was for about a 25-year break. The main thing for giving up the running portion was to concentrate on the family, and then when we came to the island in the early 80s, I got back into running when I was 55 years old. So then I joined the Prairie and Harriers in 85, and then found that I could start winning some of the races through the Island Series.
A few years ago, my mom passed away. That was a really tough time. So it was a time for Dad and I to bond and spend more time together. And we know she would have wanted us to keep going and doing that. So it's been special in that regard too.
With the support of my daughter Claire, my trainer, she calls me, we can get out and do our jog runs together. Although I'm doing some secret training she doesn't know about, so I try to surprise her sometimes.
It's only been in the last few years I've been able to run with Dad, keep up with him, because he's finally slowing down a little bit, though he doesn't like to hear that.
I have many dozens, perhaps hundreds of friends in the running community. Representing Prairie and Harriers has meant a lot to me against other clubs, and the friendships you make through running. So yes, I want to stay healthy as long as I can, you know, for the next 20 years.
I think Dad will be remembered for the fact that he just keeps on going and has a positive outlook on life, and no matter what knocks him down, he's always put one foot in front of the other and said, I'm going to keep going, and I want to stay healthy, and I want to be a role model for others. So I think he's made his own legacy that way.
I'm back with Lois Smith. Lois, let's talk a little bit about our next two inductees.
Well, Mark, Deanne Cummins is a runner. She originally immigrated to Canada from South Africa and arrived in Victoria. Her specialty was the 800 meters, and she was only the second Canadian woman to ever run the 800 meters under 2 minutes.
Wow.
And she's done it an outstanding 26 times.
Incredible.
She has retired from the top level of competition now, but is still winning in the Masters category.
Now we've also got an archer being inducted, and that's a sport that doesn't get a whole lot of attention.
We do, and it's a shame that it doesn't get more attention. Wanda Allen Parsons got her start when her brother found an old wooden bow in a ditch. And by the age of 11, she was competing in junior class. Her first national championship, she was the only girl and had to compete against the boys, and she beat them. Wanda went on to several world championships, and she's a two-time Olympian. Would have been a third time had Canada not boycotted the 1980 Moscow Games.
Is that unusual for Victoria? Do we have many archers on the island? Is it a sport that's popular or growing?
It is a very popular sport in Victoria. We have a very active club, the Victoria Bowmen, and the president of the Canadian Archery Association is actually out of that club and is already a member of the Greater Victoria Sports Hall of Fame.
Excellent. Well, let's meet our next two athletic inductees.
Growing up in South Africa was the perfect catalyst to be successful for me as an athlete, because my brother and I, we grew up on 3 acres of property and we had so much energy. Parents gave us the freedom of the grounds that we lived on. I beat all the boys in my class, and that was the first initial, wow, I'm actually kind of good at this stuff, and joined the track club. And my mom, I remember, I was actually embarrassed at the time, but my mom introduced me to the coach, and she said, my daughter will go to the Olympics one day. So it was just pretty natural for us to be great athletes. Both my brother and I are really great athletes through school. Always wanted to go to the Olympics. It was a dream of mine. Kind of didn't have a plan on how I was going to get there until my family immigrated to Canada.
For me, it was my first opportunity to see somebody with so much talent, and to watch them I still think back of the training and the racing and watching all that, and how incredible it was to see somebody with so much talent, but also so much work ethic to put it all together on the track.
1998, winning the Canadian Championships when nobody expected me to do it, and then to be on the podium and have had my family at the National Championships. It was out in Montreal. You can't describe it. The only, you know, when you see those athletes that are on the podium and the national anthem comes up and they're crying, it's great.
When I think of Dee, I think of obviously what she did on the track, but what she did off the track was equally as important to her, and I think, and the legacy that she left. And I say that because I really believe that she has inspired a whole new group of women that are racing now, and has taken our sport and her event to a whole other level.
It's an incredible feeling to have been something important in that path for our future athletes.
A very funny story, because I grew up in Victoria, on the outskirts. I have 3 older brothers, an older sister, okay? And my youngest brother came home one day with a bow that he found in a ditch, and I probably would have been about 8 years old. And from there we bought some wooden arrows from Wokel at the time, and we shot in the backyard. If I knew now what I knew then, I wouldn't have done what we did, because we were stupid. And there, my oldest brother met this fella at work that he worked at that was involved in an archery club. Now, long story short, when I was 11 years old, I said to my mother, I want to shoot also. But I remember I hated the practice, and these other people would get upset with me because I would shoot a little bit and then go, because I was still young, and then I'd go to a tournament and I would still win. So I guess when Canada first started their athletic program, and I got picked to go on that. And I guess then I thought, well, I'm being funded somewhat, so I better start practicing and shooting more. In Montreal, it was deafening. When we did the opening ceremony and Canada walked in, it was just, I can't describe the noise, the cheering, the crowds, and just, it was just unbelievable. It was a great life. I enjoyed it. I traveled the world. I met 1,000 new people all over the place. And it was a great life, and I enjoyed it.
Some very well-deserving athletes, but Lois, the Hall of Fame doesn't just honor athletes, there are other categories that are being inducted as well.
We like to look at coaches, officials, and builders, the people who donate their time and their trouble and their efforts to build the sport and support the athletes. And this year, one of our amazing builders is Alex Nelson. He has got such a resume. He was a founder of the Aboriginal Sport and Recreation Association of BC, which at the time was the first Aboriginal sport organization in Canada. He is a founder and 3-time president of the North American Indigenous Games Council. His list of credits just goes on and on. He's been recognized as the 1998 Victoria Sport Person of the Year, and in 2002 was made an honorary citizen of Victoria. Alex is a residential school survivor and credits sport with getting him through. And he says he wants to give back to sport what sport gave to him.
And Alex isn't the only one that we're going to be honoring.
No, we have Michael O'Connor, a very noted lawyer, very community-minded citizen. He himself was a rugby player at university. He went on to become an administrator with the James Bay Athletic Association, Vancouver Island Rugby Union, BC Rugby Union, and Rugby Canada. And he's spent his life boosting rugby nationally and internationally.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say rugby is definitely a popular sport on the island.
Oh yes, it certainly is. We have Rafael Melendez-Duke, also in his 80s, and he himself was a world-class sprinter in the 50s, but he discovered the starter's pistol, and it became his passion. And if you think about it, every track meet has up to 200 races, and every one requires that attention and that focus. And we are told that regardless of whether it's a kindergartner or an Olympic hopeful, that Rafael treats them all with the utmost respect and courtesy.
Yeah, and you mentioned the volunteers. I think it's important to mention that because it takes a lot of volunteer support staff to obviously run these events. And even though they're not being, inducted in this year's Hall of Fame, I think it's worth mentioning that fact.
Yes, and everybody in the sport community appreciates the volunteers' efforts. And Rafael certainly has been doing this for close to 50 years now.
All right, well, thank you very much. We're actually going to meet the rest of our inductees right now.
Well, my youthful memory quickly goes home to my home village in Kinkham Village. And there was, we were surrounded by nature. When people ask, when did you start playing soccer? I says, I was still kicking in my mom's womb to get out so I can come and kick a real ball. And then as life carried on from an educational perspective, I ended up going to UBC and then to UVic.
Alex was very talented and immediately had an impact on our team and his teammates. How much courage it must have taken for him to walk onto that soccer field. And I think in everything he's done, he's displayed that same level of courage to the challenges that have faced him, whether it's in the organization of sport or just continuing on in his own sport or his own personal hurdles through life. He always exhibits courage.
Bringing the North American Indigenous Games here to Victoria in 1997 was an extraordinary step. He did that without any federal or provincial funding, took enormous risks, and the success of that event and his groundbreaking work really put the North American Indigenous Games on the map.
One of the big feathers in my hat, as it were, came from those set of games, and by golly, it was quite a learning experience, but at the same time, very empowering.
Alec continues to be one of the most prominent leaders within the Indigenous sport movement. Not just here in British Columbia, but he's had a profound influence on the work we've done in Canada and internationally. As a leader, Alec has been a visionary, he's been a trailblazer, he's been a consensus builder, a role model. Alec is one of the most genuine, authentic, compassionate leaders I've ever met.
Sport just plays out that role. It creates a bridge between the Indigenous and non-Indigenous worlds. And then when we use sport and recreation, it becomes barrier-free, and then it becomes, we're just one. One, we're oneness.
Born and raised in Victoria, and spent my whole life in Victoria except for 3 years at UBC at law school. I was brought up in sport. We were encouraged to participate in all sorts of sports, and our parents were very, very supportive. I did not touch a rugby ball till I was 21 at the University of Victoria. It was, I've never enjoyed a sport more, and it's just a wonderful way of life.
We were in UVic together, and he convinced to come out. So he was a steep learning curve, but a real smart guy, huge size, had the background of hockey, lacrosse, basketball, all those sports. And he was a pretty good rugby player. He wasn't fleet of foot. We used to call him the Clydesdale. But he was smart, and he knew how to win. He learned that in the basketball days with Gary Taylor, his coach at Oak Bay. And it was all about winning and all about success, and that's what Benj was all about.
We won the BC Championship in 1971. It was the first time UVic had ever won it. And after I graduated, went over to UBC, I played for the Thunderbirds. And when I came back to Victoria, Gary Johnson and the then coach of James Bay, Till Briggs, persuaded me to come out and start playing again, and which I did, and I guess at the end of the day I played 12 more seasons. And so that was my days of playing, and enjoyed it very much, and then got into administration with the James Bay Athletic Association, Vancouver Island Rugby Union, British Columbia, and then Canada.
Well, being a good player and playing at a high level, he was always supportive of the players, and he knew what he wanted. And again, I think the success that he had way back in the basketball days carried on with rugby, right? And it happened with James Bay when they win, and that's what he wanted as an administrator. And when I finished my career and went on to the coaching aspect in the World Cups with Canada and British Columbia, Benj was always there on the administrative side, and he would always have my back. And I really appreciated that. A little bit controversial at times, and Benj would always be in the back rooms fighting for me because he wanted the same thing I wanted, which is we wanted success on the field for Canada.
I was about 13 when I started running. I knew that I had speed because when I was 6 years old, I was able to beat kids over 10. So when I came to high school over here, I got involved in rugby and track, of course, and all sorts of other sports. And track seemed to be the sport that really attracted me. The very first meet that I attended to was at McDonald Park, and I happened to win my heat and my final for 2 races, which really propelled me into sort of the spotlight, and I figured, well, I'm going to join the YMCA. And I started then, and I kept running until 1958 when I was transferred over to Vancouver. And I figured, well, eventually when I stop running, I want to be an official. And luckily for me, I was able to get into the officiating game when I was no longer running, or actually, it got me back into running too, because I ran as a master. And of course, in the officiating game, you meet so many terrific people who spend hours and hours at this stadium and Vancouver Island and the mainland, and all the way down to Saskatoon and Winnipeg. So it's been terrific as far as I'm concerned. And I'd do it again if I had a chance. Well, periodically I try to coach, but particularly on the start, but they don't listen to me. But that's fine, they have their own coach, and I have my own ideas. Well, officiating over here for the Commonwealth Games in 1994, I was a recall starter, but it was a grand show and terrific performances. I think I'd like to be remembered not only as a runner, but also as an official, because, you know, the officiating takes longer than the running, and so that's my claim to fame.
Pretty well written off, I think, from Vancouver in those first games, but this was a hard-working team.
I hate to say it, but the training was vigorous but successful. A lot of games were won and lost in the last few minutes, so we were usually fit enough to see the games through and win the league.
No matter who joined the club, it fitted right in. There was no animosities or jealousies. It was everybody for everybody. And that played a good part in the long run through the league and into the Kennedy Cup.
This sounds ridiculous, but about 3/4 of the way through the season, round 14, as I walked off the field, I knew we were going to win the Kennedy Cup. I knew watching them.
We were in real tough company, and especially playing the Mexicans in the final game. They were not an easy team to beat, but you know, we gave it our all and we played as a team, and it paid off.
Well, it was great. I remember the celebration in the dressing room, and it was really tremendous. But I think it's one of those things, it took a while to sink in, because I don't think we expected to do so well.
We were the last to win it, and we were the first to win it in British Columbia, in Canada, against the United States and Mexico.
This trophy makes me think not only of the final tournament, which was great, but just the entire year, and the great people that were involved and the great memories that we still all have of those days.
They had the strength to get up and go for it, and they did this. I'll never forget this team. I've coached a number of teams, but this team just sticks with you.
I'm back with Lois Smith, and Lois, it's interesting that the Victoria O'Keeffes were inducted as a team.
We do induct teams if they have made a very significant win. And the 1967 Victoria O'Keeffes win of the Kennedy Cup was the most significant event in soccer at that time in Victoria's history. It's the only sports trophy named after President Kennedy, and 1967 was the last year it was played. The O'Keeffes won against a Mexico national select side, and they were the last winner of the trophy.
Now let's talk a little bit about the actual Sports Hall of Fame itself. If people want to come down and check it out, where do they come?
Our displays are here on the concourse at Save-On Foods Memorial Center, and I'd like to point out that entry is actually free through Gate 3 from the parking lot on weekdays. It's a wonderful place to bring the family for something completely different.
Now you also have a website. Can individuals nominate? Can you get on the website and actually, submit your thoughts on local athletes?
Absolutely, you can. Our website, gvshof.ca. You click on the inductees tab, and you will see there the nomination criteria and the nomination application form. And I should just say that nominations close at the end of February for 2018, and we'd be pleased to hear from anybody who wishes to submit.
Well, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
It's been another great year and another great list of fantastic local athletes. That's going to do it for us. We'll see you next time on VI Sports.